All right, guys. So, one of the most annoying and easily disprovable pro Trump arguments that I hear on a regular basis is that Trump is the anti war candidate, right? He's taken on the military industrial complex and the deep state. Well, for an example as to why that's not necessarily the case, here we have Trump criticizing Biden for being too weak when it comes to war with Iran and saying that Israel should bomb Iranian nuclear facilities. Let's go ahead and jump into this and hear a little bit of what he had to say.
It only takes like a half a question. Usually can't answer it, but they asked him, "What do you think about Iran? Would you hit Iran?" And he goes, "As long as they don't hit the nuclear stuff." That's the thing you want to hit, right? I said, "I think he's got that one wrong. Isn't that what you're supposed to hit?" I mean, it's the biggest risk we have. Nuclear weapons, the power of nuclear weapons, the power of weaponry. You know, I rebuilt the entire military, jets, everything. I built it, including nuclear, and I hated to build the nuclear. But I got to know firsthand the power of that stuff, and I'll tell you what, we have to be totally prepared. We have to be absolutely prepared. But when they asked him that question, the answer should have been, hit the nuclear first and worry about the rest later. And that's what they should. If they're going to do it, they're going to do it. But we'll find out whatever their plans are. But
hit the nuclear first and then worry about the rest later. To me, that reads, or that sounds like somebody who could not give less of a shit as to whether or not the United States gets ourselves involved in another pointless, destructive, deadly, endless war in the region. That's what that sounds like to me. Hit the nuclear sites first and then worry about the rest later, right? Disregard the context as to why Iran attacked Israel with about 180 ballistic missiles against their military facilities, a few days ago. Disregard the context as to why that happened. Disregard the potential blowback effects that this could happen, the destabilizing effects within the region, the steps up the escalation ladder that this would lead us down. Just hit them, and then worry about the rest later. Really. Now, the surrounding context of this, in regards to Trump specifically, is obviously that if your main goal is to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, then you wouldn't have ripped up the Obama-era Iran nuclear deal, which by every single account, according to the people who were making sure that it was running smoothly, was working, right? If your goal was to prevent them from getting a nuke, you could have done it that way. Instead, Trump ripped up the Iranian nuclear deal, and then afterwards, later on, proceeded to go and assassinate a top Iranian general, significantly raising the stakes and tensions between the U.S. and Iran. He assassinated Qasem Soleimani, who, by the way, was on the ground fighting ISIS, right? So that was the Trump policy in regards to Iran, as well as significantly ramping up sanctions. An incredibly hawkish approach to Iran. That's not the only issue that he's been hawkish on. Obviously, he's extremely hawkish when it comes to anything related to Israel. More on that here in a second. But, I mean, this is also the same guy who vetoed a bill that was a bipartisan piece of legislation from Bernie Sanders and Mike Lee, I believe it was, to halt arms shipments that were illegal to the Saudis as they were engaging in their genocidal campaign on the people of Yemen. He vetoed that bill because he wanted to keep sending weapons to the Saudis. And then, by the way, him and his immediate family members, like his son-in-law Jared Kushner, proceeded to get millions, if not billions of dollars from the Saudis when they left office. Right? Maybe a little bit of corruption there, if you ask me. This is also the same Trump who tried to coup Venezuela. It's the same Trump who significantly ramped up the drone strikes from the Obama administration when the Obama administration was setting historic records for drone strikes. I mean, the idea that Trump is anti-war because what? Because he didn't get us into like an Iraq level, invasion or a new war, that doesn't make him anti-war. But that's the narrative that so many Trump defenders convince themselves of. Right? I mean, you hear this from people like Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, right-wing pundits online, is that he's challenging the deep state. He's the anti-war guy. No, he's fucking not. Listen to the words that he says on a regular basis. Hit them first and worry about the rest later. Jesus Christ, man, you're talking about setting the entire region on fire. That's what you're talking about. Now, we also had a recent appearance here, once again. Seems like this is one of his go-tos here, is making an appearance with Miriam Adelson, obviously the wife of the now dead Sheldon Adelson, who was a right-wing, pro-Israel Trump mega-donor. Now she is taking his place and is the current right-wing, pro-Israel Trump mega-donor, promising, I think it's upwards of $100 million to the Trump campaign right now. In exchange, and I covered this previously on the channel, basically it seems like her main ask is not only for Trump to continue to support Israel's genocide and their ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, but to effectively allow them to annex the entirety of the West Bank, right? And so he keeps making these appearances with Miriam Adelson. Here she is, next to Trump, saying that people who are calling to restrict weapons to Israel are the kind of people who allowed the Holocaust to happen. Let's listen to a little bit of this and see Trump sort of nodding along on the side here.
And when Israel finally fought back, it discovered all too many people in the West who preferred to condemn it rather than Hamas, who accused Israel of genocide, who called for Israel to be denied weapons of self-defense, who made Jews feel unwelcome on U.S. college campuses, who treated Israelis as if they were their war criminals. These are the kind of people who allowed the Holocaust to happen.
So, if you point out the, at this point, obvious, indisputable fact that the Israeli military has been indiscriminately killing civilians, starving civilians, committing a series of, war crime after war crime after war crime, if you point that out, or if you call for the U.S. to follow U.S. law and cut off the weapons to Israel, which are totally illegal under international law and U.S. law, if you do either of those things, then you are basically Hitler 2.0, and you want a second Holocaust. That's what she's saying here, guys. This is one of Trump's largest individual donors here, and he's done multiple events like this. So what does this tell you about Trump's position in regards to Israel? We also have Trump at the same time. This is just from today. On CNN, Trump vows to remove the Jew haters if reelected during event commemorating October 7th attacks. Now, what does he mean by remove? What does he mean by the Jew haters? You guys tell me. Based on his previous statements, it seems like by the Jew haters, he means anybody who's critical of the actions of the government of Israel. And by remove, well, we've heard him talk about this before, that he wants to deport pro-Palestine protesters, right? Now, given the fact that a vast majority of those protesters are American citizens, not exactly sure where or how you're going to go about doing that, but this is something that Trump has been saying repeatedly over the last number of weeks. We also have Trump calling for the DOJ under his potential future administration to go to college campuses and to crack down on anti-Semitic speech. He wants to send the Department of Justice to go crack down on colleges for not being aggressive enough against, again, critics of Israel. That's what he's discussing here, right? Not that they weren't already brutal enough, as is under the Biden administration. I mean, how many students were arrested for going out and protesting against a genocide? How many colleges had people either deported or had people expelled or suspended from classes? I mean, had the police sicked on their own students? I mean, the response to the college protests was incredibly brutal over the last number of months. Trump wants to ramp that up, to send the Department of Justice to go after them as well. We also have this, Trump saying on this radio show, Hugh Hewitt's radio show, Israel has to do one thing. They have to get smart about Trump. Speaking about himself in the third person here, because they don't back me. I did more for Israel than anybody. I did more for the Jewish people than anybody, and it's not a reciprocal, as they say. He says it's not a reciprocal. I don't know if he's using that word right there, but again, he's mad because the polling shows that Jewish Americans either tend to lean towards the Democratic Party or like they're roughly pretty evenly split. Historically, they have leaned pretty Democratic. And so he's angry about that because he's saying, look, I took a bunch of money from the Adelsons and other pro-Israel organizations and individual donors. I took a bunch of money from you guys, and then I returned the favor. And he says this openly, by the way. I gave you guys the Golan Heights, right? Syrian territory that's illegally occupied by Israel. I gave you guys the Golan Heights. I'm letting you do whatever you want in the West Bank. I'm letting you do whatever you want to the people of Gaza, right? I moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. I'm giving you everything you could possibly ask for. And yet Jewish Americans aren't all backing me. Because in Trump's mind, there is no difference between a Jewish American and Benjamin Netanyahu. There is no difference between a Jewish American and the current actions of the government of Israel, which is like inherently in and of itself pretty anti-Semitic as something to say. But he's pissed off about it. And by the way, the other angle on this is that the Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu does support Trump. They do want Trump to win. Because, as I've said before, even though Biden has given them materially, in terms of weapons, in terms of diplomatic cover, even though he has given the Israeli government over the last 11 months everything they could possibly dream of, he still does the public-facing, well, there have been too many civilians that have been killed, or Israel has indiscriminately bombed, or, where we want a ceasefire, right? Trump would not even do the fake bullshit pretending to care about Palestinian civilians. He wouldn't. He would do exactly as he just did in that first clip that we watched about Iran, saying, yeah, have at it. Go finish the job. Right? These are words that he's used in the past. So Benjamin Netanyahu wants Trump to win this election because he knows Trump will not push back, even rhetorically, in any way, shape, or form. So the Israeli government does want Trump to win, right? And there's a case to be made that Benjamin Netanyahu knows the election is coming up in less than a month now, right? Insane that we're that close to the election, but it's less than a month away. There's a case to be made that Benjamin Netanyahu knows that that's the case, and maybe that was part of his calculation in ramping everything up with Lebanon and with Iran right now, right? Because he does want to sabotage the possibility of Democrats winning this election. Now, obviously the point needs to be made here. At the same time, even given how utterly deranged Trump's foreign policy is, that the Kamala Harris, Tim Walz ticket is really not that far off from where Trump is. So 2 different clips here that I want to show you guys, and then I'll finish off the video. First, here we have Tim Walz going over on Fox News Sunday. Now, the entirety of this interview, beyond this 2-minute clip here, he actually did pretty well, especially when he's talking about domestic policy. But on this one, let's just go ahead and jump into it and see how he conducts himself when he's asked the same question that he was asked during the debate. Like, would you support a preemptive strike on Iran by Israel? Would you support striking the oil facilities or the nuclear facilities? Let's hear what he had to say here.
Okay, so I want to pick up where Alexis left off there in the Middle East, because you were asked in the debate the other night a question about whether or not you would support a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran. You didn't really get to an answer on that. So this is...
Can we also just pause just for 1 second on the fact that that was the first question of the debate was, would you support a preemptive strike on Iran? Not would you support restricting weapons to Israel? Do you support a ceasefire? Would you send American troops to go fight a war on Israel's behalf? None of that. It was, do you support a preemptive strike on Iran? Okay.
The administration continues to call for Israel to moderate its response after being attacked by Iran. Do you now think that Israel has a right to either strike oil facilities, nuclear facilities? What's your position on that?
Well, look, let's remember how this started, and we're approaching tomorrow a tragic anniversary. Hamas terrorists murdered over 1,200 innocent Israelis, 46 Americans.
Okay, so he's doing the same exact playbook for what Kamala Harris does, and I think she does it in the clip that I have loaded up here in a minute, where regardless of whatever the actual question was, right, the question here was, would you support a preemptive strike on Iranian nuclear or oil facilities? That was basically the question. And both of them, Kamala and Tim, immediately revert back to October 7th, right? That's not what the question is about, number one. Number two, this did not start on October 7th. None of this did. 2023, before October 7th, was already one of the deadliest years on record for Palestinians, especially Palestinian children, right? Not to mention the ongoing apartheid, not to mention the ongoing ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, the ongoing siege and blockade of the Gaza Strip. All of that put aside, third point that I think is important to bring up about all of that is that he just gets the basic facts wrong here, guys. We're 11 months into this. Not even the Israeli government at this point claims that 1,200 innocent people were killed. There were about 1,139, I think is the official number, of people who were killed on October 7th. It's between like 350 to 400 of them were IDF soldiers who were killed. The remaining of them, yes, were, civilians who were killed as a part of this attack. We don't know exactly how many of those civilians were killed by Israel using the Hannibal Directive against their own citizens. There were certainly hundreds of people that were innocent civilians that were killed. There were certainly war crimes committed on that day. But he just regurgitates the 1,200 number. I saw Obama the other day saying the 1,400 number, which is something not even the Israeli government claims at this point. Anyways, probably talking too much about this, but it gets under my skin that like this far into it, you're not even getting the basic facts right about your go-to response on such a key issue. But he continues here.
Took hostages. We have been clear. Israel has the right to defend itself. We've always stood in that position. We need the hostages returned, and we need to bring an end to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But again, the point is it's Iran is at the heart of this, and their proxies that bring disruption throughout the region. That's why being in the Situation Room as Vice President was working with Israelis to repel the attack we saw this week. They tried it back in April, the same thing. And that's the point of being and boxing Iran in. President Trump tore up the nuclear deal that moved Iran closer to a nuclear weapon. He also allowed Iran to shoot down an American aircraft in international airspace with a tweet. And when Iranian weapons, missiles fell on U.S. troops, he called it a headache when it was traumatic brain injury. Just to be clear, we have always said we reserve the right to protect American troops, our allies in the region, and that there is consequences for Iran.
Okay, so we can go ahead and cut it off there. We'll get to Kamala here in a second. Essentially what he's doing here, entirely fair critiques against Trump for ripping up the Iran nuclear deal, his response when, U.S. troops were injured. That's all fine. That's a good response there. Now, what he leaves out here when he's talking about how Iran is at the core of all of this and Hezbollah and Hamas are their proxies and they're just puppets of Iran and, we need to box in Iran and whatever else. What he's leaving out here is just the most basic question of all of this, which is, why did Hamas attack Israel on October 7th, right? If you listen to the government of Israel, if you listen to many U.S. politicians and media figures as well, they'll just say, well, it's because Hamas and because the Palestinian people broadly, and maybe even Arabs broadly, hate Jewish people, right? And so they went in, they wanted to kill as many Jews as possible, and it's that simple, right? That's the kind of thing that they would say. They want to eradicate the Jewish people from the region. Now, the reality of it is, there are about, I think, 5 main reasons why Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. If you listen to the openly stated reasons that Hamas was providing for why they did it, it goes like this. Number 1, the mistreatment of Palestinian detainees who have been taken by Israel, right? That's one of them. Another one, point number 2, is the incursions or the attacks on the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. That's why they called October 7th Al-Aqsa Flood. That was the name of the operation from Hamas. So that's point number 2. Point number 3 is the ongoing siege and the blockade of the Gaza Strip that had been going on for years and created catastrophic results for the people living in Gaza. That's point number 3. Point number 4 is the ongoing illegal expansion of Israeli settlements and the displacement of Palestinians in the West Bank, as well as the ongoing apartheid and the occupation of Palestinians in the West Bank. That's point number 4. Now, those are the 4 reasons that Hamas gave for why they did October 7th. Point number 5 that I would add probably on top of that, as sort of a secondary reason, is that the issue of Palestine had just been completely swept under the rug by the international community, especially by Israel, especially by even other Arab countries in the region, and especially by the United States as well, who, with the Abraham Accords and with everything else, just completely put it on the back burner, right? They effectively told the Palestinians, Israel is going to normalize relations with some of the other U.S. allies in the region, and you are going to live under apartheid and occupation endlessly. That is your fate. You will be continuously bombed, as Israel calls it, mowing the lawn. You will be continuously displaced and ethnically cleansed from your land to make way for Israelis. And that is your fate. There's nothing you can do about it. Nobody's coming to help you. Accept it, right? That was the message. And so I think the 5th thing that I would add on is that part of the attack was just to bring this issue to the forefront of the international community, right? To bring attention to it, essentially. So those, I think, are the core reasons for why Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. Now, the reason I bring all of that up is because if you don't understand that underlying reality, then you're never going to get to the end point of achieving some sort of a diplomatic off-ramp or some sort of a lasting peace. If you believe that all of this happened because Palestinians hate Jewish people, then we're never going to get anywhere. Right? You have to address the underlying material reasons why the blowback, which is what it was, of October 7th happened in the first place, which is the occupation, right? The illegal occupation and the subjugation that has been going on for decades of Palestinians. That's what you have to address. You can't keep people in those conditions year after year, decade after decade, and expect that there is not going to be violent blowback to that, right? Now, the other point, final point, and we'll move on to Kamala here, is that it's interesting to me how when we're talking about a country like Iran, they use words like proxies, right? Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran. Hamas is a proxy of Iran. But then when it comes to like the U.S.-Israel relationship, we use the word ally. We don't say Israel is a proxy of the United States. And I think that that's an interesting distinction that our politicians and our media pundits make, because the reality of it is, like, Hamas and Hezbollah both have national ambitions, right? In the case of Hezbollah, what was their origin, right? They came up as a resistance force to an Israeli invasion and occupation in Lebanon, right? You could argue the same thing with Hamas, roughly along the same lines. These are both resistance groups who have their own national ambitions. They don't merely operate along the whims of whatever the Iranian government wants, right? In the same way that the Israeli government doesn't necessarily do every single thing that the US government wants them to do, and vice versa, right? So to say that Iran is at the center of this, it's like, yeah, they're allies with Hezbollah and Hamas. Yeah, they probably funnel weapons to both of those groups. But it's not as if, like, you attack Iran and then all of these other issues that you see are going to disappear. That's not how any of this works. That's not how any of this works. Attacking Iran and striking their oil facilities or their nuclear facilities or escalating this to the point of an all-out regional war, this is not going to be good for anybody. It's not going to be good for the people of Israel. It's not going to be good for the people of Iran or Lebanon or Gaza or the West Bank or even the people of the United States. This is in nobody's best interest. Except for maybe you could make the case for it's in the best interest of Netanyahu because it allows him to stay in power as this continues to escalate. But anyways, we move on here to Kamala Harris. Long rant there. But here we have Kamala Harris. She recently sat down and did a 60 Minutes interview. And I might do another clip today on some of the other things that she said throughout this interview, but this was her response to a question of who she thinks is the greatest threat to the United States. Let's hear what she had to say here.
Which foreign country do you consider to be our greatest adversary?
I think there's an obvious one in mind, which is Iran. Iran has American blood on their hands, okay? This attack on Israel, 200 ballistic missiles, what we need to do.
Okay, she said Iran has blood on their hands, American blood on their hands, and then proceeded to bring up the Iranian attack against Israel with the ballistic missiles that killed nobody. Is that what just happened? Okay.
To ensure that Iran never achieves the ability to be a nuclear power, that is one of my highest priorities.
So if you have proof that Iran is building a nuclear weapon, would you take military action?
I'm not going to talk about hypotheticals at this moment.
What about China?
What?
China, first of all, we must win the competition for the 21st century with China. We must be able to compete and win. We should not seek conflict. But we have to understand that there are parameters in which we must operate that include ensuring, for example, that we protect American business interests.
So say if China attacks Taiwan, would we use military force to support Taiwan?
Bill, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals, but listen, we need to make sure that...
These are pretty important policy decisions that she's describing here, right? I mean, we're talking about potentially going to war with Iran. We're talking about potentially going to war with China. It's a pretty big fucking deal, right? You would hope that a presidential candidate, whether it's Trump or Kamala or anybody else, would be able to answer the question, are we going to fight a war with China, right? The next most powerful country and military on the face of the planet over Taiwan? Maybe make your position clear about that, right? And again, the same thing with Iran. To me, the idea that Iran is a threat to the United States, in what way? I mean, unless you view Israel and the United States as the exact same thing, and Israel views Iran as a threat to them, I don't know, maybe you could make a stretch of a case there, but Iran is a threat to the United States as much as we want to make them a threat to the United States, right? We had a potential pathway towards achieving better relations with the Iranians. It was the Iran nuclear deal. We had a potential there. Biden, even after Trump ripped it into shreds, he could have tried to revive that. He didn't. And I didn't hear anything in this Kamala answer about potentially trying to get back to that sort of a reality. And the other question about, Iran developing nuclear weapons is like, if you don't want them to develop nuclear weapons, then you have to achieve that through diplomacy. If you keep threatening to topple the Iranian government, or if you keep threatening to bomb them, then that's only going to increase the likelihood that they feel like they need a nuclear weapon as a matter of self-preservation for the Iranian government. That's how this kind of shit works, right? And by the way, the same thing applies with many other governments that the U.S. calls our adversaries around the world. It's not that the United States is enemies with Iran for any principled reasons, okay? Let's make that explicitly clear. We're best friends with other countries in the same region as Iran, like Saudi Arabia and Israel, who are responsible for countless human rights abuses and violations of people's freedoms and, war crimes and all of that stuff. So it's not along a principled line that we are enemies with Iran. This is not something that has to be the case, right? It just so happens that Israel and the Saudis and the UAE and all these other countries that we are more, friendly with, that they happen to be working in what the U.S. views as what's in the best interest of maintaining U.S. global hegemonic control over the geopolitical situation and over the global economy. That's how we break these things down. It's not along principled lines, right? But here you have Kamala Harris saying Iran is the greatest threat to the American people, apparently. How exactly? Not sure. But that was her response. So there you have it. You have Trump just completely deranged, wanting us to get into a regional war with Iran. You have Tim Walz sort of, I guess more lightly floating the possibility of doing that while also getting basic facts wrong. And then you have Kamala Harris sort of like a word salad. I won't tell you because it's a secret, whatever my foreign policy is. So there you go. 2024 election for you guys. Everything's going fantastic.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying